입니다. 이성호 목사님, 예, 이성호 목사님 감사합니다. 그래서 제가 일단 제 소개를 잠깐 하고요. 그 다음에 제가 아시는 분들도 계시고 모르는 처음 뵙는 분들도 계시고 그래서 잠깐 소개하는 시간 하고 그러고 프로그램 시작하면 좋겠습니다. 그래서 제 이름은 정화영이고요. 저는 북일리노이 연회에 속해 있고 여기서 CRCC 미니스트리만 굉장히 오래 했어요. 30년 가까이 된 것 같아요, 지금. 하도 오래돼갖고 이 연수가 기억이 안 나는데. 그래서 지금 현재는 네이퍼빌이라는 장소에 있고요. 그리고 이 마당과는 저 옛날에는 마당 보드에도 있었고 지금은 있지는 않고요. 하고 세미나도 여러 번 참석하고 그렇게 해서 제가 참 좋아하는 그룹입니다. 그래서 오늘 함께 할 수 있어서 너무 기쁘고요. 그리고 여러분 알게 되게 된 거 참 감사하게 생각합니다. 그래서 저희 돌아가면서요. 여러분들 물론 매 세션마다 하셨는지는 모르겠는데요. 성함하고 어디 계셨는지, 그 다음에 CRCC 미니스트리에 대해서 어떤 패션을 가지고 계시는지 아니면 챌린지를 가지고 계시는지 그냥 간단하게 나눠주시면 좋겠습니다. 그리고 화면에요, 제가 이름이요, 다 보이나? 예. 네, 제가 화면에 이렇게 올라온 이름대로 제가 여러분을 인바이트 하면, 아니, 제가 처음 한 분 하시면 그 다음에 뮤추얼 인비테이션을 하면 제일 좋겠네요. 저는 전주현 목사님 인바이트 하겠습니다.
네, 저희 그냥 계속 그럼 한국말로 해도 되나요?
그동안 영어로 했나요?
그러니까 세션은 영어로 했었는데 이성 목사님 어떻게?
저 영어로 해도 좋아요. 저 몰랐어요. 이성호
그래서
목사님이 이성호
보통
목사님 가이드라인을 주세요.
Yeah,
그렇군요. 한국말.
our official language is English.
그러면 네, then we'll do it in English. That's good.
Okay.
예.
Okay. Hi, my name is Hwayoung Chong. I'm in Bensenville, Illinois. This is my 7th year as a CRCC minister. My passion like for CRCC ministry, it's for now, even though it's been 7 years, I'm still learning a lot. And just always there's a surprise to experience the new culture and new like characters and everything. But I don't think sometimes it's only the culture or the different language or but it's all human beings, and I see that common too. Of course the struggle is it is the eagerness to communicate what I think in a deep sometimes I have trouble to explain what it is like. So language barrier still, yeah, that's a challenge. I'd like to invite Hani 목사님.
Thank you. Can I speak Korean? Because I was like, I feel like, I was tasting like gochujang or 된장찌개 when you speak Korean. And now I'm like, feeling like I'm tasting like, spaghetti or meatball sandwich or something.
I'll let 성호 목사님 guide us on that. In terms of language, which language we use.
Yeah, our official language is English, so you can taste like meatball or spaghetti.
Okay.
And have indigestion.
Let's try spaghetti. Okay. My name is Hani. I have been in CRCC for 4 years, and this is my 5th year. I'm serving in Virginia annual conference in Virginia, of course. And what was the question? Okay, what question was?
Your passion for CRCC.
My passion.
And challenges.
Okay. I don't think I have, hot passion, but I'm just here that God called me. I know that God called me here to serve the church and ministry here, people here. So I'm here, and challenge that I have a lot, but one thing I would like to express today is probably cultural and generational gap. My congregation is really aging community, and they are my grandparents' generation, not my parents' generation. So,
Yeah.
and also the location is really isolated, even though the big city is really close, but the culture and everything is really isolated here. So, yeah, and yep, and I invite 주성 목사님.
Thank you, Pastor Hani. My name is Jusung Kim. I'm serving now the Virginia Annual Conference in the Nova districts. My church is the Wesley Chapel United Methodist Church, and this is my first year to new appointment and the new CRCC ministry. And my passion about the CRCC ministry actually it looks like the same to me, Pastor. I usually the passion to serve the people and follow the God. So it is the same to if I have in the Korean United Methodist Church, even though the United Methodist Church, God showed the way and I follow you, and God, and I serve to my people, and this is my passion. So it's the pastor and the ministry is the same way to me. Yeah. And I pass to the Jongmin Lee, pastor.
Thank you. My name is Jongmin Lee, and I'm serving East Columbus UMC and White Creek UMC in Indiana, Columbus, not Ohio. And this is my first year of CRCC ministry. I was serving Korean. Usually I'm serving the Korean United Methodist Church, but this is my first year, so I'm still learning and adjusting everything. So I'm still learning process. And my passion for CRCC ministries, our churches has older generation, old people. So I want to take care of them and pray for them. That is my passion for ministry. Thank you. And I'll pass to 이혜선 목사님.
Hello, everyone. I'm currently visiting Reverend Heron Yu as a church here in Ohio. I've driven 150 miles this morning to visit.
Wow.
Hasan Lee, and I currently serve Centerville, Riceville, and Parade Street Charge. So I have 3 churches. My passion for CRCC ministry is that through the process of my own discernment, God was leading me to Paul in the New Testament. I was able to see myself in Paul in many ways because, Paul was a Jew. He was a Pharisee, but he was a Hellenistic Jew, so he would have been comfortable with Greek more than or Hebrew. At the same time, he had a Roman citizenship, so he had this triple identity going on with him. Me, I was born a Korean, but I grew up in Sri Lanka. I lived in Sri Lanka for 15 years, and now I'm here in the United States. So I have this triple identity also happening in me. Through Paul, as in the Testament, we read that Paul was as the apostle to the Gentile. I feel that is where God is calling me. And my passion is lined in bridging those multicultural background that I bring into ministry. And since Reverend Yu is sitting next to me, I'll invite.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you again. And yeah, Reverend Hwayoung 목사님, yeah, nice to meet you. Currently I'm serving First United Methodist Church of Wellington, Ohio. And yeah, this is my 5th year of CRCC ministry. My passion. I all the time think about that. I am a fruit of mission because I knew that Mary Scranton, who was the first woman missionary from UMC, came to Korea about 100 now, maybe 140 years ago, maybe. And she founded the first Korean women's school, Ikwa. Yeah, and then her William Scranton founded the woman's first hospital in Korea as well. So I thought that Mary Scranton was 51 years old. She came to Korea, and she was buried in Korea. Someday I will be in here, come my home. Yeah, and then I believe that I'm a fruit of the mission, and also to share the diversity, the beauty of diversity with American people, American congregation, but also American community. So, and challenge is, yes, cultural and language barrier is still, because I'm the first generation, so still I have some kind of struggle. Yeah. But they are wanting, stop my talking. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you
Yeah,
like to-
정열방 목사님 invite 할게요. I'm so sorry, I forgot that. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dong Bak. Actually, I'm driving on the way to the pharmacy to get a COVID test right now. But there's no symptoms. But yeah, just for the travel. Anyway, I'm serving the Milford United Methodist Church in Upper New York Annual Conference, and this is my 2nd year. I just finished my 1st year of ministry in Milford United Methodist Church. And well, I'm eager to make something with my congregation and children in my church, because I just thought that I should learn the ministry, language, and the culture of the United Methodist Church, and then I should adjust all the things of the United States. But I am recognizing that my congregation also have a mind to learn the difference from me. So I'm really interested in the setting and cooperating the ministries. There's something in the church within the differences between me and congregations. And also, at the same time, that becomes the challenges for me to serving in CRCC ministry, because I'm still in lack in the knowledge of the culture and language of the United States. So yeah, this is so good opportunity to share and learn so many things that I have not known, and then this good opportunity, the place is filled to learn and then applying for what I learned.
Mm.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. And 성화 목사님, would you like to share too?
Okay, I'm serving Central United Methodist Church in Stockton, California. This is my first year in Stockton, newly appointed. Before that, I was in Concord, California for 12 years. So my passion for the CRCC ministry is that I can make difference in the world through the CRCC ministry. When I was invited to the Jeongdong Gamnigwe in Seoul, Korea to be a senior pastor, I said, no, why should I go to Jeongdong? And then they said, well, you can preach it to all the 장관님s and 국회의원s and the big shots in Korea. And I said, well, still it's just a Korean church. When I preach in USA, I can preach it to the president and Supreme Court judges and representatives in USA, which can make difference in the world. Really? Yeah. So I said, I rather preach it to the world. And it's like when I was serving in Santa Clara KUMC in Santa Clara, California, I realized that when I go to the police station or community, nobody knows. It's just the Korean community that's the biggest church in Korean community, and but nobody knows in the community at all. So we started serving homeless in the park, and we gave scholarship to the high school graduate and tried to work with the community. But when I come to serve the Caucasian church, everybody knows in the town. So I go to meet all the leaders in the community and work with them and change policies, and we can work with the city council and everything. That was really meaningful, and I said that some of our church members can go to their like council or house or anywhere, and they can talk to make policies and change even policies. And our church members even talk about Israel-Palestinian policies. They try to influence them. They try to talk with the Russian and Ukraine conflict, and they try to influence to the North and South Korean relationships, things like that. So I think we have a better chance to influence the world politics, even to secure peace in the Korean Peninsula through our CRCC ministry. So I don't want to be just in Korean community ghetto and become famous or influential among Korean people. I want to be influential to world leaders. That's my passion. So I live in there. My challenge is that even after 35 years, still I have some Korean accent. So many people have a hard time to understand me and ask questions again. What did you say? So that's still my challenge, but I can just explain twice. That's all.
That's great. Thank you so much. And 성화 목사님, it's so good to have you here. I always love your positive spirit, and it's so good to hear from all of you. So our topic today is CRCC ministry and theology, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here you go. I think I'm going to try to make it a little bit larger. Let me see. Okay, so so at Madang, I talked about this topic several times, maybe at least 2 times. And since CRCC ministry and theology is such a huge topic, so what we're going to cover today is really a small portion of that. And one time I focused more on CRCC ministry and interfaith ministry together. And another time I focused more on Paul's CRCC ministry. So I was thinking, how about this year? What should I talk about? And I thought I would talk about what I'm very interested in right now, which is the topic of home as it relates to CRCC and migration and ministry, and how we can understand our God, like theological understanding of God in this context. And we'll also look at Jesus's own CRCC ministry too. So again, this is such a huge topic, and just think of this as a very little small portion of CRCC ministry as it relates to theology. So let's begin with terms that we use. So our Madang is cross-cultural, cross-racial, right? Oh no, cross-racial, cross-culture, right? CRCC. But we also know that we use intercultural or multicultural in the maybe similar context. So these are some of the dictionary definitions of what it all referred to. So cross-cultural dealing refers to dealing with or offering comparison between two or more different cultures or areas. And cross-racial as dealing with two or more different races. And of course, these two are not the same. That's why we have cross-cultural, cross-racial in our title, right? So we can be in the same race, but we can have different cultures, for instance. And then more increasingly, people use the term intercultural along with cross-cultural, or sometimes instead of cross-cultural. And it seems to refer to a deeper understanding and respect of all cultures. Not that cross-culture doesn't have that deeper understanding, but some of the dictionary meanings seem to indicate that when we use cross-cultural, the assumption is that you have one dominant culture, right? You bring your own culture, that's your dominant culture, and you are encountering another culture that is not your dominant culture. But intercultural relationship, it's really all cultures come more like equal. That's the sense, at least. It's very ideal, but that's the sense. And of course, multicultural presence and diversity, presence of diverse and multiple cultures. And I will tell you in a little bit about my own definition of cross-cultural. But before we go there, I hear a lot of times this question, where are you from? I'm sure you hear that too. So where are you from? And how do you respond to this question? And I think at the heart of this question is what defines our home, right? Where is our home and what is it? And one of the 목사님 mentioned that you want to talk in gochujang. You feel like gochujang, 된장찌개. And when we speak in English, it feels like spaghetti and meatballs. And I really resonate with you, because home, I mean, we can think about home as where we sleep. Like I sleep in Naperville, right? That's my location where I am, or where we work, where we were born. I was born in Seoul, Korea, and I grew up in Seoul, Korea. So that's my home in that sense. Or where you live now, where you have your residence. Or it can be where you feel most comfortable. So like living in the United States doesn't mean that I feel really, do I feel at home? It's a very complex question, right? And sometimes I feel very much at home, sometimes I don't, and there's different feelings and responses to that. At times I feel more at home in a very strange place. When I love travel, I love to travel, I love to go to different places. And sometimes when I'm in a place I've never been before, that's where I feel like very comfortable too. So and I feel at home. Sometimes it's very strange, but I do in the new place I am. So where you feel most comfortable or where you have meaningful relationships, like home is found in deep, meaningful friendship or your relationship with your spouse or children, family, co-workers, in all different kinds of relationships. Or you can find home. Your home can be your spouse. I know one of my favorite faculty members when I was in seminary, she said, my husband is my home. And I really always, I remember that I like that. Or your child, so it can be persons or characters. I remember when I was growing up in Korea, I love to read. I love to read novels, especially, and I especially loved Dostoevsky. And I felt very, very much at home with a very particular character in his story, Brothers Karamazov, the youngest brother, Alyosha. So I really felt at home with Alyosha. So he was my home for a while, for instance, but it can be an idea, justice can be your home. Peace can be very much your home. Or food, right? Food evokes the feelings of familiarity, the intimacy, like gochujang, as we talked earlier. And I just feel whenever non-Korean people say that they love kimchi, or even they say, I've tasted kimchi once, even it's just once, it's just very strange. I feel intimacy right away when they say they oh yeah, do you eat kimchi? Wow, that's wonderful. So the food is very important, sense of home, or it can be an imaginary locations, paradise, or somewhere doesn't exist, but you can feel at home. So again, like this question, where are you from? Where is your home? It's a very simple question, but it can be very complex when we think about how to answer, right? So I don't know how when people ask, where are you from? You can say, I'm from New York or Korea, but how do you go beyond that? I think whenever we go deeper with this question, there's more cross-cultural understanding that can happen. So for I said these are dictionary definitions, right? But my own definition is of cross-cultural, cross-racial relationship. And I would like to go back to that idea of home. So cross-cultural relationship or experience is like visiting a home that's not your own. Whatever I feel very comfortable at home, cross-cultural experience is like going to another home. And there we learn who are the people there, the customs, what clothes they wear, food, what kind of food they eat, what's beyond kimchi, and what values do they have. So learning all these different kinds. And then so it's not stopping at visiting, it's not stopping at learning about new things, but really the true cross-cultural experience is in finding a third home. So that's not my own home, where I feel comfortable. It is not another person's home, which can be completely where I'm a stranger completely, but finding a third home. So it's a little bit ambiguous, right? It's not always easy to define. It's undefinable because it's a fluid concept. It's constantly changing as to what this third home is. It's another place, and not always comfortable. I may have to eat different food. I may have to sleep in the way that I don't like to. So it's not always comfortable, but it's the third home, something that did not exist before or experienced before. In that sense, it's more future oriented. Something that's being formed right now and into the future. It's neither nor, it's neither my own home or your home. and it can be both and. It's also, I bring some of my home into it, and then I experience a different home of another, and then we are forming into a third home together. So cross-cultural experience is when it's at its best when it is mutual, when it's the mutuality that we bring something together and we're making something new together. That's when it's best. And when it becomes a dominant relationship, one is better than the other, hierarchical, then even though it is an experience of my home and your home, it can turn into something oppressive at times or hierarchical, and it results in a negative experience. And I would like to think that as what Jesus talked about as the reign of God, so basileia, right, in Greek, so the reign or the coming, the rule of God. Sometimes we translate it as kingdom of God. But whatever the English term or 하나님 왕국 Korean term is, the basileia embodies the vision that Jesus had about a third home. I think it's not in the world exactly. It's not exactly the replica of whatever we think of as a heaven, but it is something that doesn't really fully exist right now, but we're moving towards. So that's how I understand. So I brought this picture here because a long time ago, I heard a story that a Catholic priest and a Buddhist monk met. Probably you heard that story too. And then the Buddhist monk greeted the Catholic priest by making a cross. And then the Catholic priest by doing 합장, so holding hands together and bowing. I mean, it's not exactly that picture. It's Pope Francis meeting a Buddhist monk, holding hands together. But that is, to me, that story, I don't know if it's the real story or not, but that story embodies that that aspect of finding a third home where we can all live together. That I thought that really beautifully reflects that. So when it comes to ministry, and I think it's at least 3-part cross-cultural ministry, because we are dealing with orientation culture, so my own home, right? So when we are in cross-cultural ministry, so my setting right now is I am Korean American, and my congregation is predominantly white, and we have some ethnic diversity, but predominantly white. So for me, my orientation culture is Korean culture, and my congregation's orientation culture is like American white culture. And then, so that's where you are from, and encounter culture is where you encounter. So I'm encountering white American culture in my congregation, and people are encountering Korean American culture. So oftentimes we think about these two, but there's also personal culture that we bring into. So oftentimes people have a love-hate relationship with their own orientation culture. So for instance, only because of my orientation culture is Korean, it doesn't mean I love everything about Korea. There are things that I don't like about Korean culture, and the things I love about Korean culture. So often that love-hate relationship exists. And I think that's very common in all different cultures. So you bring your own personal culture. So what you value, that can be independent from your orientation culture, or that can be very much influenced by your orientation culture, but your personal culture. So there are all mixture of different cultures. And when we engage in ministry, each and everyone brings this orientation, encounter, and personal culture as well. So let's look at Jesus and his CRCC ministry. And when we talk about culture here, cross-cultural, cross-racial, we think about ethnic diversity there, the cultural diversity, gender is part of that, education, class, and whether you're a Roman citizen, so citizenship, Roman citizen, or you're living under Roman occupation. So there are diverse factors, and there are so many different stories about Jesus and CRCC ministry. So I just picked out a few. Luke 4, we hear about Jesus's first message in Luke, and then we look at it more closely in a minute. And we hear the story about Jesus and the Canaanite woman when he traveled outside Palestine, so outside Israel territory, into Tyre and Sidon. And Jesus and Samaritan woman's encounter in John 4, and a lot of references to Jesus visiting Samaritan area, and stories about the Good Samaritan and the Samaritan leper who came back and gave thanks to Jesus. So all related to that relationship between Hebrews and Samaritans, and Jesus's healing of a centurion, Roman centurion's servant. So there's that relationship with Roman citizenship and Jesus, and how Jesus was called a friend of sinners and tax collectors. So with the social divide between the righteous and the sinners, crossed the boundary. And when the distinction between male group and female group were more rigid, he had women disciples, and women were learning along with male disciples. And his ministry to social outcasts due to illness, whether it be leprosy or blindness in different ways. So the demarcation between the healthy and the sick in the midst of he crossed the boundary. So he crossed a lot of boundaries in a way to relate to the so-called others, or in Greek, xenos, like xenophobia, the fear or hatred of others. But those who were otherized in the society or considered the other, we see a lot of that cross-cultural aspects of Jesus's ministry. So I want us to look at Luke passage more in a minute, but then I'm going to share screen a little bit and to see if you have any responses to what we discussed so far, any feedback, any comments, or can you think of any stories of Jesus in engaging in CRCC ministry that we haven't named yet? Don't be shy. I know you all have your own thoughts. Let's go back to the very first question. Where are you from? When people ask you, how do you respond? And what is your home? Where do you find home?
When you ask the question, it occurred to me that when people ask Jesus, where are you from? Jesus didn't say, I'm from Nazareth or Galilee or anything. He said, I'm from above. Oh, maybe that, yeah, I have never thought about it, but that's how Jesus thought about his home.
Wow, yeah, that's a very good thought. And that's especially true in John's gospel, right?
Right.
John, that Christology of from above, Jesus came and then he's going back where he came from.
Right. And many people try to say, that, oh, he is the son of the Mary and Joseph, and then you know his brothers and things like that. But he always said that I have to stay in my father's house. And also he said, I'm from above. And so that's the identity that Jesus had. And when people ask me, where are you from? I always say, I'm from South Korea. So maybe that's my identity.
Great, thank you.
You know, that question, you know, many of us probably watched that, you know, short movie like meme or like, you know, the on a trail, one guy asked a Korean American woman, I mean, she's, I don't know, but and then he kept asking where I'm from, and then like she said, I'm from LA, and the same way, and then the one who asked constantly asked, so where are you from, like, you know, and that happens to me too. A lot of times if I say I'm from Chicago, and then like, and they wanted to know more about it, but then, you know, so sometimes if it's just words just passing through, or you know, strangers, I just answer shortly, like, you know, whatever they want to hear. Whether it's from like where I'm located, or like, you know, from originally from Korea. But that question really made me to think where I am really from, and you know, so now it's more comfortable to be asked, where is your home, actually. So, and it's the same question, but it's a different approach. Then I can just comfortably say where I feel like my home. And it depends on the situation, I guess.
Yes, yeah. Has anyone ever been heard or been told, go back to your home? Ever? Happened to them? It happened to me. I was walking the streets in Chicago with my daughters. So my daughters, they were born here. And then they are adults now. I mean, 3 girls, we were walking, and then there was one white man passing by, and then just very mad and saying, you Chinese, go back home. And then it's not even 60s, it's a few years ago. So, so like, what? But that was really funny. But yes, yeah, the home, and to me too, some people ask me, where are you from? And then like, yeah, I'm from Chicago, and then they say, yeah, and before that, like before that, where are you? So that really is a very interesting question. Let's go back to Luke. There you go. So let's look at, oh yeah. And then please, if you can think of any other illustrations or engagements that shows Jesus in CRCC ministry, please put it in the chat box. So in addition to this, please do so. It'll be very interesting to see from your perspective too. So from Luke, it is the passage right after Jesus's temptation in the wilderness. So can I ask 이혜선 목사님 to read this passage? There are 3 slides. I'm going to kind of turn it over. And as you actually listen to it, I'll show you the questions. Just pay attention to how did the people respond first? And why did they like Jesus's message? And let's pay attention to those 2 examples that Jesus gives. And why did people hate those examples? And how is home interpreted here? And what do we learn about cross-cultural ministry of Jesus in this passage? So can you see it well, 혜선 목사님? Can you read it for us?
Yes. Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verse 14 through 30. Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of our Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue was fixed on him. Then he began to say, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do you hear also in your hometown the things that we have heard you at Capernaum?" And he said, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. But the truth is, there are many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah. But when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was severe famine over all the land, yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way.
Thank you so much. I'm going to copy these questions and put it in the chat box. Let's see, and then stop sharing, and I'll put it in the chat box. Okay, so all right, so this is a very familiar passage for us. So the passage that Jesus quotes from Isaiah, and that was good news, right? It was good news. So people really responded positively. And what was at the heart of their response? Why did they really like that message? We heard that they were all amazed. Why do you think they liked that message?
Okay, I want to say because the people want to that time, they're gonna the oppressed for the Roman Empire. So they're gonna say fierce. They want freedom too about out of the Roman Empire, but there's no power, and so the Israel people and Jewish people want to the more the heroic people, heroic presence. So they're gonna hear about the Jesus that is the very it's powerful story or the miracle stories they're gonna think. So if the first time they're gonna hear about the Jesus, what happened to he, so first time they're willing to that they're gonna welcome to the new hero about the Israel people. It looks like David or any other the king of the Solomon looks like that. So the very first time they went to there, they seems to that it's new the powerful person about the Jewish people. So I think it's that.
Right, yes, yeah. Who evokes the prophetic message from the past and proclaim the year of Jubilee, the freedom and liberation in that context of political oppression. So yeah, thank you. Great perspective. Any other thoughts about why people really welcomed him? They were amazed. So they heard the good news proclamation, right? And then who do you think they thought the good news was for? It's not a trick question. It's a simple question. When they heard it, like when they said the good news to the poor and liberty to the oppressed, they thought it was for them, right? It's like, yay, it's good news for us. But then to explain further, Jesus gave those two examples, right? So the healing of Naaman the Syrian and the widow in Sidon. So it's all not the Jewish people, but outside the Jewish territory. And why do you think that they hated those examples so much? And then it's not just hatred. It seems like to me even irrational. They tried to kill him. According to this passage, they're trying to throw him off the cliff. And there's a very intense emotional response. It's just not like that. Well, I disagree. I think differently. That kind of response. It's like they were enraged. They were angry. Why do you think they responded that way?
Because their culture and the history that they are not one of them, and the history that was they are like the hatred they had been really deeply rooted in their culture. And I think I found somewhere interpreting this chapter, it sounds like, you know, you are mentioning like Hitler or some figure that it's not really, you know, that they will be really furious to hear from the pulpit.
Yeah, they were kind of like enemies. And then definitely, if not enemies, outsiders, not one of us. But then Jesus was lifting up those examples that it's not something that he started at that moment about reaching out to those outsiders. It's not he initiated, but it's been done before by God's Spirit and by the prophets, so that reminding people that it's in our own tradition was something that people could not accept, right? They heard the truth and the good news. Yes, they really liked it because they heard the truth and the good news, right? So, you know, I just find it very significant that from the very beginning in Luke's gospel, we hear about this approaches to cross-cultural ministry and teaching for Jesus. And they lived in the time when there's the demarcation between insiders and outsiders were so clear, so that's where Jesus was. But I think maybe can we take a little break? Do you want to take a little break? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then get back? Okay, so we talked about, oh, thank you. we talked about Jesus being cross-cultural here. So like one of the important aspects of cross-cultural is to cross the boundaries of insiders and outsiders. So like in our time, we have insiders and outsiders, right? And Jesus's time too. And depending on where your social location is, or Sitzum Leben, so where you're situated, who's insider and who's outsider can be different, but the division is with religious and spiritual division of those who are clean and unclean, those who are pure and impure according to the Jewish ritual laws in Jesus' time, and ethnic differentiations. So the Hebrew people, and then the half Hebrew, right, Samaritans or Romans and other ethnic groups, and political division of the Roman supporters and the revolutionaries. Especially one of you mentioned the context of imperialism. So those who were really advocating the military confrontation with the Roman Empire, and what we know is the zealots were the part of that who advocated revolutionary method, and those who really like parasites, right, who gained from the colonialism, like tax collectors. So that's why they were really hated, because they not only extract money from people, but they are collaborators of the oppressors. So such divisions, and of course economic divisions, and the gender divisions, male, female, and then age divisions, and all of that. So those were in different ways insiders and outsiders, and we can see Jesus's ministry as breaking that insider-outsider cultural paradigm, both in his teachings, through his teaching. And Luke chapter 4, we just looked at, is one of the examples. And not only in his teaching, but throughout his ministries, by eating with sinners and tax collectors, including women in his ministry, and lifting up the Samaritans in his examples in so many ways. And so, I think we probably have an experience of an outsider and know how it feels. I just talked very briefly about when I was told, go back to your home. It means that you don't belong here, right? You're a foreigner, you're an outsider. You're not among one of us. That's the very clear message like that. And even for my daughters who were born here, and that feeling is really alienating. And it's breaking down the communities, breaking apart. So we won't talk too much about this, but I really encourage you to think about your own experience of vulnerability and experience of being an outsider, and how it feels. And then who are the outsiders in your context? And what does the CRCC ministry that we are engaged in mean in our globalized world? The world is smaller than ever before. We're very well connected than even 50 years ago. And what does it mean that we know other parts of the world well? And how do we do CRCC ministry in such a way to make positive influence for our very fragile world? So when we talk about globalization, Daniel Grudy, in his book Globalization, Spirituality, and Justice, talks about 3 different views we can have about globalization. So overview, as he says, is with the internet and McDonaldization, what he says. So McDonald's everywhere. We can say that Starbucks everywhere. Wherever you go, you can have the same taste of coffee. And then we have global economy. So that's the like outside the surface view of globalization. And it looks like we are well connected, and the world is increasingly more like a village, global village kind of a sense, right? Apart from your own nationality, you can go wherever you go, you can find the familiarity, the sense of home there. So that's the overview, but the underlying underview that's often not become visible in the surface level is the getting more and more greater gap between the poor and the rich, the international debt issue. And we have neo-colonialism. So not necessarily like in Jesus's time, you have direct colonialism, but the neo-colonialism really oppresses smaller countries or countries without enough resources in different ways. And consumerism and ecological destruction is going on so fast. I just read this week that the global warming is progressing faster than people had anticipated even 10, 20 years ago. So by 2050, the Chicago summer weather can be 125 degrees in Fahrenheit. So it's coming up really fast. And economic political oppressions going on. So all this underview, we see the negative impact of the globalization and issues of injustice. But then he says the inner view is to look at this from the perspective of the human heart. So not looking at globalization just simply from economic, political, cultural matter, but as a human issue, and then to really heal the pains of globalization, we must really return to God. And one of the key matters of returning to God is really this aspect, the bridging the insider, outsider, and finding that third home where everybody can flourish. And that really turns into the question of migration and CRCC ministry. So, I mean, we are immigrants. Some of us came here because of family. Some of us came here because we wanted to study more. And sometimes it's our own choice to stay in a new country. Sometimes we are in a way, we don't have any choice but just to stay. So many various reasons, but we're all part of that migration. And especially thinking about migration, we turn to those who are more or less, because of their life's circumstance, forced out of the place where they call home and migrate. So I just wanted to bring you this project. So this called Mapping Journey. This artist put together the stories of migrants speaking in their own voices and in their own stories. And I want to show you a little clip from YouTube. And actually you won't hear the voices here in the YouTube, only the subtitles. So the words in English, but it kind of shows the migration happens all over the world in many different places. I mean, we all came from Asia here, or like Haesan 목사님 moved a lot more than some of us might have. But it happens all over. So I'm going to change the screen. So stop share here and show this different screen of YouTube. Okay, good. So mapping, it's only 2 minutes long. To stop here and go back to our slides. I brought that YouTube video because migration is at the heart of cross-cultural relationship because you move, right? But at the same time, leaving one's home and finding another home in a different place, it involves lots of challenges, rejection, and it's such a very difficult experience. And we see that in both the Hebrew scriptures and New Testament too, the stories of rejection. And actually I want to show you this picture. Probably you've seen this. It's from Claremont United Methodist Church a few years ago, so 2019. It made it to the New York Times story that during Christmas time, so it was their nativity display that Joseph as father, Mary as mother, and baby Jesus were all detained in separate centers. So that's what would happen today, like if they were coming from Mexico to United States and thinking about how the Holy Family crossed the border from where they were into Egypt. And it was just it shows the pain of migrants so deeply. So migrants suffer the losses. So leaving home is it can be exciting, but it is also a loss at the same time. And you lose your familiarity, family, relationship. You may remember the first day that you came to the United States, or the first foreign place that you've away from your home, and you may remember it very vividly. I do remember the first time I came to the United States. I remember the date. I remember the time I arrived in the airport, and I feel like I can even remember the smell of it. So that's such a very important experience of transition. At the same time, because of that insider-outsider dynamics, we migrants come to the new place as a outsider and experience a lot of rejection and discrimination, and can subject to hate crimes. Like currently in the United States, because of the migrants, people think that they replaced our job, right? The great replacement theory, that because of migrants, those who are insiders already, those who are already here, are complaining that our lives are getting worse, and develop hatred towards the newcomers. And in a way, that's kind of like scapegoating, so blaming all the problems to the migrants or newcomers. And the migrants are subject to financial manipulation. So those who are new to the new home don't know what to do, how to navigate those immigration processes, or what to do, and just can be taken advantage of because of lack of experience and knowledge. And there's a spiritual humiliation of being no status, that you don't have any paper. Sometimes you have to risk your lives. And every year we hear about those who are crossing the Mexico-US border, people, adults and children who lose their lives. It's just heartbreaking, that human trafficking issue. And for women and those who are vulnerable, physically vulnerable, can be subject to violence, including sexual violence. And you have separation of family. So there's lots of stories of tears and suffering and lament for those who are migrants. And Joan Moruskin, in her book Immigration and the Bible, says that Jesus and his family fled political, religious, and ethnic persecutions when they went to Egypt. And these are all present-day grounds for asylum and refugee status, and a lot of immigrants come to other places because of those reasons too. So if Holy Family arrived at the US border, they will be all sent to different detention centers. Luckily, very recently, the law changed so that children can stay with parents, but even just a few years ago, they were like this. So we think about migration in terms of human rights too. And when we do the CRCC ministry, these are all part of that context. So because all people don't come into the equal status, there are different power dynamics in that too. And then migrants have different stories. And I think it's very interesting. So I thought a lot about this, and then there are stages in migration, and we can include immigration as part of migration too. And I think there's some parallel with Jesus's life, in the sense that when you leave home, when you lose home, that's kind of like a death. You experience the death and the death of your home. And then you go through this period of you're homeless. You can't really find a new home, but at the same time you have homesickness. You long to have a home, but the new place doesn't seem like your home because of various reasons that we mentioned above, right? And then that can be compared to a time in the tomb. You already lost your home, and then you are in that ambiguous space, that middle ground, liminal space between death and new life. And for Jesus, it was 3 years, but it can be years, and it can be several decades. Sometimes it may seem like a lifelong journey. And then I think we can compare the homecoming to resurrection as a returning home. And just like Jesus had that identity of coming from above and going back to Father's house, going back to God, so returning home as the vitality, new life, and resurrection, finding a new home or finding a third home, as I mentioned earlier. Or the way I have come to understood myself is that I just, for me personally, I feel like I was in this middle stage for a long time, that I felt really totally, utterly homeless at the same time, just had the pang of homesickness, the ache of homesickness. But finally, I came to realize I'm living with a movable home. So like wherever I go, I live in God, and that's my home. So that was my resurrection experience. But however we may experience it, I think we really parallel with Jesus's life in a way. That's the very theological interpretation of migration or immigration. So in response to migration crisis, the human rights issues, and the abuses and challenges we experience in cross-cultural relationships, our theological questions include, but are not limited to. So we look to the Bible, right? What does the Bible say about God of the migrants, God of the exiles, diaspora, people scattered all over the world without their home, right? Sojourners, aliens, foreigners, and refugees. What does the Bible say about that? And where is God in the midst of that? And how is the church called to do in our globalized our very, very multicultural world, and multiglot world. We speak so many different languages. So Hebrew scriptures, there are such ample examples of migration. People are moving around all the time, or sometimes, God pushes them out. Adam and Eve, starting from the very first human story out of Garden of Eden into the world as we know, and Noah and family. After the flood, the nations spread all around the world, and Abraham and Sarai, later Abraham and Sarah, living a nomadic life. They had a comfortable home in Ur, right, at the current day Babylon, and then they had to move all the way to Palestine, and then to Egypt, and then came back to Palestine, living a nomadic life. The Hebrew scriptures seem to suggest that they did really well, actually, in terms of wealth. They had possessions. They had like housekeepers. In some ways, that they did well, but on the other hand, they were really sojourners. They had a hard time finding Sarah's tomb, burial ground, when she died, for instance, because they were considered as not one of us still, after living for many decades. And Joseph's story, Moses as an undocumented minor in today's term, but we can apply that to his childhood, Ruth and Naomi. There's just so many stories of migration. And each and every one of those stories involve cross-cultural relationship, because they moved from their home to a new place, have the experience of being a foreigner or strangers, and relating to the so-called others and trying to find a new home there. So there are ample resources, and in the New Testament too, more than anyone else, from Jesus. And Karl Barth, the systematic theologian, wrote in one of his church dogmatics, in one of the volumes, talk about incarnation as a trip to faraway land. And I find it very, very interesting concept. It's like an immigration, right? Immigration from heaven, or God's home, into human world, migrated to earth to live with humanity. And that really tells us a very strong aspect of who our God is. God is an immigrant. God didn't stay in that heavenly home, but God voluntarily moved to dwell among the human beings. And that tells us so much about, gives us so much deeper meaning for our own immigration experiences. And then also the meaning for cross-cultural, all kinds of cross-cultural, cross-racial, intercultural, multicultural experiences and ministry. And his birth, and again to Egypt, and his teachings about when I was a stranger, how people treated him. And he, in his public ministry, he was itinerant instead of staying in one place. So Jesus is, in terms of geographical location, very small, but always moving. But we can also think about in that as a metaphor of the larger global context. And of course, Paul and early missionaries on the move all the time. So when we think about cross-cultural ministry, there are layers of ministry. In terms of ministry with migrants or as migrants, that hospitality includes compassion and welcome for all, including embracing the stranger or the other, which is a very, very, very strong and biblical concept. Like in how many times we hear the reference about take care of the strangers, widows, and children, right? They're all three all come together, and strangers or foreigners a very important part of extending God's hospitality, and for justice, because the new immigrants come as often as unprotected, vulnerable, and for that we need systematic change, and that's strongly linked to that reign of God for all God's people, and also at the same time engage in theological reflections. Especially for me, I'm very, very interested in developing this idea of God as migrant. And actually, I'm writing an article along with a Catholic theologian together, and hope we can do this by the end of this year, by December. That's our deadline. But reflecting really on God as an immigrant and how understanding God as immigrant change the paradigm. And how would it be if we think of God as migrant in our cross-cultural ministry context, how we can thrive together, and how we can also provide hospitality to our communities, and how we can receive migrants as gifts, not as great replacement theory, but as gifts and as God's presence. So these are all the layers of ministry. So for hospitality, we see God's radical hospitality in the Hebrew scriptures. Again, the widows, children, especially orphan, and the strangers, and remembering the Holy Family as refugees, and especially the more of the practice, the practical aspect of practice of gleaning, right? Leaving the harvest, intentionally not harvesting everything, but leave some harvest so that the poor can come, or homeless can come and have their own grain or food. So that's the hospitality, and remembering Jubilee. And this was one of the aspects that Jesus included in that first preaching in Luke 4, that 50th year for freedom for all, celebration for all who would receive back their original property, and slaves will return to their home, to their families. That very radical idea of liberation for all, the human rights for all, and even animal rights, because animals are supposed to rest too, right? So hospitality, and then advocacy and justice work. And I got this from the United Methodist Justice for Our Neighbors website, because I think they do a really, really good job about the advocacy for migrants. And I think you can look at it later too. And then the theological reflection of incarnation as divine migration. And of course, this is not all about incarnation, but it's especially one particular perspective of how we can understand incarnation. So Korean theologian Jung-Young Lee writes in his book Marginality, Key to Multicultural Theory, that incarnation can also be compared to divine immigration, in which God emigrated from a heavenly place to this world. As an immigrant in the new world, Christ experienced rejection, harassment, and humiliation, which we saw in Luke 4 today. Like, people hated him and tried to kill him, and eventually he was killed. And by the way, this book is so, I think it was published in early 1990s, but it is still so good. Very, very practical, very applicable, even in today's world in year 2022. And I'm really admiring all the contributions that Jung-Young Lee did made for theology, and I'm very sad that his work is not as highly recognized in theology. And I think there's a lot more that we can uncover and develop of this idea of the incarnation as divine migration when it comes to cross-cultural celebration and ministry, so that cross-cultural ministry is not just it's not just about that it's good for everyone or it's good for human world, and it's always good to bring harmony and peace, and that's all true. But as Christians, as pastors, and as theologians, we know that to have that idea of God as migrant, and that really shifts our understanding about how to live, how to minister, and how to do the church. And Jesus himself defined himself as a stranger. He talked about he does not belong to the world. And he's going back to God, right? Especially in John, as we said earlier, it's very strong. John's Christology is very strong about that he came from God and he's going back to God. That's Jesus' self-identity in John. So his home is really home in heaven. And Julia Kristeva is in her book Stranger to Ourselves, she's a French feminist, say that how can we really understand a foreigner or someone who's different from us, especially in our cross-cultural relationship, someone who comes from different culture. If we don't know that, like if one did not know one was a stranger to oneself, and I think it's very profound and significant to recognize that there's a stranger within us. And I think the way I understand is sometimes I do things that I don't even understand. And sometimes it feels like understanding myself is the hardest job. And I mean, we do that. We do like psychotherapy or see counselor or do spiritual director so that we can understand ourselves better, right? It's not so much about, I mean, it's as much as about understanding others too, but it's really about so that we can understand ourselves well, so that we know why we respond to particular things in particular ways. But I think it's really interesting if we don't understand, once we have a stranger to ourselves, how can we understand others? So it kind of brings us to our self-reflection and self-understanding. So CRCC pastors, I think we as nomads, so we're nomads. And this idea is really from Rosie Braidotti, Nomadic Subjects. And she understands herself as a nomad. And then she explains nomadic subject as it's the experiential situation as a multicultural individual. And she really thinks that's a contemporary subjectivity because of the globalization and lots of movement that we can have. But nomad is different from migrant. So migrant might be understood to be as the one who moves from one location to another, but nomad is, she says in her own words, referring to herself, my own figuration of a situation, postmodern and culturally differentiated understanding of the subject in general, and for herself as a feminist, and of the feminist subject in particular. And she talks about herself as a person with no mother tongue, because I think she moved from one country to another and learned different languages. So like, it's really hard to say she has a mother tongue, she said. And she had the transnational mobility, having several passports. And as nomadic subjectivity, it's not necessarily a world traveler, so like visiting different places, but it's a simultaneous occurrence of many at once. So like you feel like you're you belong to, for instance, France, but at the same time you have like Korean passport, and then you are very culturally very have affinity to African culture. Like, so that's all at the same time. So that's what she means by nomadic subjectivity. And the polyglot who speaks many languages as a linguistic nomad. And I don't think I'm a polyglot or linguistic nomad, but I have come to myself to realize as I'm a nomad. I live in the United States now longer than that I lived in Korea, but at the same time, I have this sense that I talked to you earlier about my home is movable, right? I have a movable home. Wherever God is, I just go, and then that as I move, I bring that home wherever I am. So in different churches, in different ministry settings, and that's where I find my meaning. And I think CRCC pastors are not exactly like this, as Rosie Braidody mentions as nomadic subject, but in a certain degree, we are nomads. And we already crossed from one culture to another, from Korean culture to the United States, and still trying to find that third home all the time. So I have some references here, but just to conclude for today, I really think CRCC ministry is about living out the Pentecostal spirit today with multiglot, different languages, different understandings, different regions all come together in God's spirit. So I'm going to stop here, and I think we just have a few minutes left. Any feedback, comments, or questions?
So 이혜선 목사님 is more like a nomad than migrants, right?
Yeah, what do you think about that idea of nomad? 이해선 목사님, do you think of yourself as a nomad or other pastors?
Yes, even when I was living in Sri Lanka, where I have lived for 15 years, we had to move into a different house every 1 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The longest I've lived in one place is my dorm room when I was in high school. I think that's why joining the United Methodist Church and being in an itinerant system was a good match for me. I already have been moving every 1 to 3 years all my life.
Yeah, I think it's also nomads. You can move geographically, but you can also move around in different ways too, right? Spiritually, psychologically.
Yeah,
In essence, maybe not having home. Yes, yeah.
my children, when they were young, every summer they ask us, "Are we moving this year?" It's like they expect every year that we are going to move. So we moved a lot, especially at the beginning of our ministry. We served small churches and moved a lot between me and my wife. So they were expecting us to move a lot, and maybe they tried to find their own identity, and whether I'm Korean or American, Korean American, or God's child, or somebody stranger, so they I think they have a more trouble and the psychological nomad journey than me and my wife. So I have to ask them whether they feel like a nomad life or not.
Yes, I think that's probably for our next generation. I think that sentiment probably is very strong.
First, I want to share. I'm sorry because I'm late, but I want to say thank you very much for your articulation. Actually, I myself actually experienced something as a nomad, but I couldn't really find a word for myself as an identity because I spent little less than 5 years in Sydney, Australia, and back into Korea, and spent some more years, and came here in the United States for now 3 years. So in Australia, I was a stranger, and back in Korea, I was not the same because I'm not really a authentic Korean anymore. And now I'm here, but try to be considered as a Korean American, but not I'm not really Korean American anymore because I have a previous experience. My previous experience is a little different than so-called Korean immigrants here. So my issue was how I can distinguish or identify myself in this diversity so that I can, persuade others that you are in the same journey that God called you wherever you are. But because, like you just shared, I actually couldn't really identify myself as a stranger / nomads. So it was quite hard to articulate what I'm thinking to others. However, it was really clear, and it was a very last piece, but yeah, it helped a lot.
Yes, I'm thinking about the Henry Nouwen's idea of the wounded healer, right? So in a way, our experiences as immigrants or nomads or stranger itself will be very well, in a way, used by God to heal others in our broken world. I really believe that it's something that we can bring. It's our gift in cross-cultural ministry. Great. So, well, I think it's about time to wrap up, right, 성호 목사님? It's been such a joy to get to spend some time with you and see like old friends here and some of the new faces. And it's wonderful. Blessings on your journey. I think Madang is coming to an end pretty soon, right? Isn't it? You only have a few sessions left.
Right,
So,
in August, yes.
yeah, that's good. Yay, that'll be another big celebration. So,